Now with late-breaking news, the woman convicted of murdering Mexican-American music star Selena has been denied parole.
The killer of Tejano superstar Selena has been denied parole.
1. Yolanda Saldívar. Selena Quintanilla was more than a rising Tejano singer. She was a cultural icon, beloved by millions across the world. At just 23 years old, she had already broken records, won Grammy Awards, and stood on the brink of crossover stardom. But on March 31, 1995, everything came crashing down in a single moment of betrayal that would shock the world. The woman who pulled the trigger wasn't a stranger. She wasn't a stalker hiding in the shadows. It was Yolanda Saldívar, the woman Selena had trusted to manage her fan club and boutiques. To the public, Saldívar appeared to be a loyal supporter. Behind the scenes, she was embezzling money and spiraling into obsession. Selena's father began investigating financial discrepancies and raised alarms about Yolanda's behavior. Selena, always the peacemaker, agreed to meet with Yolanda in a final attempt to recover missing documents and settle the matter peacefully. What happened in that Corpus Christi motel room was anything but peaceful. According to prosecutors, a confrontation escalated. Yolanda, armed with a .38 caliber revolver, fatally shot Selena in the back as she tried to flee. Selena managed to run to the hotel lobby, bleeding and collapsing, with her last words identifying Yolanda as the shooter. The news of her death devastated fans and sparked an outpouring of grief not seen since the death of legends like John Lennon or Elvis Presley. But the horror didn't end there. For nearly 10 hours, Yolanda Saldívar sat in her pickup truck with the gun still in her hand, threatening suicide, as police negotiated. Eventually, she surrendered and was arrested for murder. Bookmark. At trial, Yolanda claimed the shooting was an accident, that she never meant to hurt Selena. But the jury didn't buy it. The evidence, including the bullet trajectory and Selena's dying words, told a different story. In October 1995, Saldívar was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She has served nearly 3 decades and remains incarcerated at the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Her name, to many, is synonymous with betrayal. Because this wasn't just the killing of a celebrity. It was the killing of trust, the cold-blooded murder of a woman by someone she once called a friend. Number 2. Celeste Beard Johnson. In the early 2000s, Celeste Beard Johnson was living a life most people only dream of. A sprawling mansion, a wealthy husband, and everything money could buy. She had married Stephen Beard, a retired Fox broadcasting executive nearly 40 years her senior, after meeting him while working as a waitress at a country club in Austin, Texas. What looked like a Cinderella story from the outside would soon become one of the state's most shocking betrayals. Behind the glittering image of domestic bliss, investigators say Celeste was growing restless. Despite Stephen's generosity, including legally adopting her twin daughters and lavishing her with gifts, it wasn't enough. She began an affair with a woman named Tracy Tarleton, who worked at a mental health facility Celeste had briefly attended. It was a twisted relationship fueled by manipulation, emotional dependency, and secrets. Prosecutors argued that Celeste used Tracy's devotion to orchestrate a plan to get rid of Stephen permanently. On October 2, 1999, while Stephen slept in his bed, he was shot in the stomach with a 20-gauge shotgun. He survived the initial attack, only to die months later from complications. The investigation took months. At first, it looked like a random home invasion, but a deeper look into Celeste's financial records, hospital visits, and suspicious behaviors raised red flags. It was Tracy who finally broke. She confessed to the shooting, but claimed Celeste had manipulated her into doing it, even promised they could be together forever once Stephen was out of the way. Celeste denied everything. But in 2003, a jury believed Tracy. Celeste was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years, 2 full life terms. She is currently housed at the Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. To this day, Celeste claims she was set up, a victim of a jealous ex-lover. But prosecutors, jurors, and Stephen's family remember the story differently. To them, it wasn't love that fueled this crime. It was greed, and the willingness to let someone else pull the trigger. Number 3. Christine Marie Paolilla. Christine Paolilla was once seen as a quiet, shy teenager with a troubled past, bullied for her appearance, struggling with alopecia, and emotionally devastated by the loss of both parents before she was even a teenager. But by the age of 17, Christine would become one of the most unlikely perpetrators of one of Texas's most horrifying mass murders. A crime that would stun the community of Clear Lake and the entire country. In 2003, Christine and her boyfriend Christopher Snyder walked into a house in Clear Lake City, Texas, where 4 of her former high school friends were hanging out. What happened next would become known as the Clear Lake Massacre. Armed and ruthless, the couple gunned down 18-year-olds Tiffany Rowell and Rachel Coloradus, along with Marcus Priscilla and Adalbert Sanchez, 2 young men who just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. The crime scene was described as execution style. Each victim was shot multiple times. Rachel was also bludgeoned, a sign of personal rage. Authorities initially had no suspects. Christine was even seen grieving publicly, attending funerals and playing the role of the devastated friend. For years, the case went cold. But in 2006, a tip from an anonymous caller reopened everything. Christine, now addicted to heroin and living in a motel, was arrested and charged. Her boyfriend Christopher had already died by suicide after learning she had confessed. Alone, Christine faced trial. Prosecutors painted a picture of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge. Christine had once been close to Tiffany and Rachel, friends who had helped her through bullying and even gave her a makeover in high school. But things had soured after Christine started using drugs and dating Christopher. Prosecutors argued that she believed her friends were trying to separate them. In 2008, Christine was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. She won't be eligible for parole until 2046, when she'll be in her 60s. The families of the victims say no sentence can bring back their children, but at least justice was finally served. The Clear Lake Massacre remains one of the darkest chapters in Texas crime history, not just for its brutality, but for how unimaginable it seemed that a former friend could walk into a room and slaughter people who once tried to lift her up. 4. Debra Jeter. On June 5, 2009, Texas dispatchers received a chilling 911 call. A woman's voice, calm and eerily steady, said the words no one expected: "I just killed my children." That woman was Debra Jeter, a 32-year-old mother from Hillsboro, Texas. What followed would devastate the state and leave many wondering how a mother's love could turn into something so tragically twisted. Debra had been battling severe mental health issues for years. Just one day after being released from a mental health facility, she picked up her 2 daughters, 12-year-old Kelsey and 13-year-old Kirsten, for her first unsupervised visit since losing custody in a bitter divorce. What should have been a joyful reunion turned into a nightmare. She took the girls to an abandoned farmhouse under the pretense of going out together. Once inside, Debra pulled out a knife and attacked both children. Kelsey was killed almost instantly. Kirsten, though brutally stabbed and slashed, miraculously survived. Despite her injuries, she was able to plead with her mother to call for help, and somehow, Debra listened. When first responders arrived, they were met with a scene so horrifying it would scar them for life. One daughter dead, the other clinging to life, and a mother standing there, covered in blood, calmly pointing the way. What made the case even more haunting was Debra's own 911 call. In the audio, she shows no panic, no urgency. She simply waits. "I didn't want them to go through what I went through. I wanted to save them from it," she would later say. There was no lengthy trial. Debra pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her surviving daughter, Kirsten, eventually recovered physically, but the emotional scars run far deeper. Debra Jeter's crime shook Texas to its core because it violated something sacred, the instinctual love of a mother. She wasn't a stranger or an outsider or even a step-parent. She was their mom, and in a moment of darkness, she became their destroyer. Inside Gatesville Correctional Facility, Debra Jeter will spend the rest of her life behind bars. But for many across Texas and beyond, the question still echoes: how could a mother do this? 5. Vickie Dawn Jackson. When you walk into a hospital, you place your life in the hands of the people sworn to protect it. But in the quiet town of Nocona, Texas, that trust was betrayed in the most horrifying way imaginable. Between December 2000 and February 2001, patients at the Nocona General Hospital began dying, not from their conditions, but from something far more sinister. Most were elderly, vulnerable, and recovering. Their deaths were sudden, unexpected, and at first, unexplained. But soon, a pattern emerged, and it pointed to one woman, 36-year-old nurse Vickie Dawn Jackson. Authorities discovered that Jackson had been injecting patients with mivacurium chloride, a powerful muscle relaxant used during surgery that, in the wrong dose, stops a person from breathing. She worked the night shift. She had full access to the medications. And she chose her victims with chilling ease. One by one, patients began dying in their hospital beds. By the time investigators connected the dots, 10 confirmed victims had died under her care. But some believe the true number could be as high as 20. What made Jackson's crimes especially disturbing was the calmness with which she carried them out. There was no clear motive. Some speculated she enjoyed the power of playing God, controlling who lived and who died. Others pointed to personal stress and psychological instability. But no one could explain the cruelty of silencing those who came in seeking help. When she was finally arrested, the town of Nocona was stunned. Vickie had been a familiar face, a mother, a nurse, a neighbor. But behind the scrubs was a killer in plain sight. In 2006, she pleaded no contest to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison. She now resides in a Texas women's correctional facility, with no chance of parole. The case of Vickie Dawn Jackson is more than a local tragedy. It's a chilling reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized. She wore the uniform of a healer, carried the tools of mercy, and used them to end lives. Inside those hospital walls, her patients were supposed to recover. Instead, they became victims of a nurse who turned care into killing. Number 6. Verna Deann McClain. In the quiet town of Spring, Texas, what began as a sunny April afternoon turned into a nightmare no one could have imagined. Kala Golden, a 28-year-old mother, had just left a pediatric clinic with her 3-day-old son, Keegan. She never made it home. As Kala buckled her newborn into the car seat, a black Lexus pulled up beside her. Out stepped Verna Deann McClain, a 30-year-old vocational nurse, armed and desperate. In a moment of unthinkable violence, McClain shot Kala multiple times in broad daylight, pulled the baby from the car, and drove off with him. Witnesses watched in horror as Kala, bleeding and barely conscious, tried to crawl back to the vehicle, screaming for her baby before collapsing in the parking lot. By the time authorities responded, Kala was gone, and her infant son had vanished. The Amber Alert triggered a massive manhunt, but within hours, McClain was in custody. She confessed almost immediately. Her motive? Chillingly calculated. Verna had recently suffered a miscarriage but hadn't told her fiancé. Desperate to continue the illusion of pregnancy and motherhood, she made a plan, and Kala Golden happened to be the target. Investigators discovered that McClain had scoped out the clinic in advance. Her intent was premeditated. She had brought a weapon. She had no connection to Kala. It was a stranger-on-stranger killing with surgical precision, all to steal a child and cover a lie. Baby Keegan was miraculously found alive and unharmed in McClain's home, cradled in a blanket, waiting for a mother who would never return. The horror of the case rocked not only the local community, but the nation. A mother murdered for her baby in a place meant to be safe. Verna Deann McClain was charged with capital murder. At first, prosecutors sought the death penalty, but in a plea deal reached in 2013, she avoided execution and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now housed in a Texas women's prison, McClain lives out her days, knowing her need to maintain a lie ended an innocent life and traumatized a family forever. The case is a haunting reminder of how easily calculated desperation can become deadly. She didn't just take a baby, she took a mother, shattered a family, and forever changed a town. All for a plan built on deception and carried out at the barrel of a gun. 7. Kristi Ann Koslow, Fort Worth, Texas, 2003. A brutal home invasion left one woman dead and her husband clinging to life. But what looked like a robbery gone wrong turned out to be something far darker. A murder plot orchestrated by someone inside the family. At the center was Kristi Koslow, a 20-year-old woman who resented her stepmother, Elizabeth Libby Koslow, and blamed her for the family's dysfunction. Behind closed doors, Kristi had become increasingly volatile. She wanted her inheritance, and Libby was in the way. Kristi recruited her boyfriend, Chris Gregg, and his friend, Chris McDermott, to carry out the plan. The details were chilling. They would break into the Koslow home in the middle of the night, kill Libby, and attack Kristi's father, Robert Koslow, to make it look like a random act of violence. On March 12th, the plan was set in motion. Armed with brass knuckles and a stun gun, the two men entered the home as Kristi waited outside. Libby was beaten and then shot execution style. Robert was also attacked and left for dead, but he survived. And when he regained consciousness, his statements began to unravel the story. Police soon discovered that the so-called robbery was anything but random. Phone records, text messages, and witness accounts pointed to Kristi's involvement. She had offered her boyfriend a share of the inheritance money in exchange for committing the murders. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment crime. It was a calculated betrayal from within the home. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Kristi confessed to her role. In court, the betrayal stunned her father, who testified against his own daughter. Kristi showed little emotion, even as she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2027. Her two co-conspirators also received lengthy sentences. But it was Kristi's cold orchestration that haunted the courtroom. A daughter who weaponized love and loyalty to eliminate someone she hated, using others as tools for her own gain. Now locked away in a Texas prison, Kristi Koslow is a stark example of how deeply resentment can rot the human soul, and how easily family ties can become fatal when greed and hatred take the wheel. She wasn't just a troubled daughter, she became the architect of a nightmare. 8. Erin Caffey. In the quiet town of Emory, Texas, nothing could have prepared the community for the horror that unfolded on March 1, 2008. A 16-year-old girl named Erin Caffey, raised in a strict but loving Christian household, orchestrated one of the most brutal family massacres in the state's history, all for love. Erin had been secretly dating 18-year-old Charlie Wilkinson, a relationship her parents strongly disapproved of. When Erin's father, Terry Caffey, forced them to break up, Erin didn't rebel with typical teenage defiance. Instead, she plotted revenge. In the early hours of that March morning, Erin's boyfriend Charlie and his friend Charles Wade broke into the Caffey family home with swords and guns. While Erin waited in the getaway car, her family was ambushed inside their own house. Her mother, Penny, was shot and stabbed repeatedly. Her two younger brothers, ages 13 and 8, were brutally murdered in their bedrooms. After the slaughter, the house was set on fire. Miraculously, Erin's father, Terry, survived, crawling out of a burning window with multiple gunshot wounds. It was his testimony that would lead police to uncover the unimaginable. His own daughter had helped plan the massacre. The truth shattered what remained of the Caffey family. Erin had asked her boyfriend to take care of her parents, and even after her brothers were killed, she never tried to stop it. Investigators were stunned at her cold detachment and lack of remorse in the days that followed. In court, Erin Caffey pled guilty to 3 counts of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2038. She was just 16 years old when she threw her entire family into flames, both figuratively and literally. Her boyfriend and his friend also received life sentences. But Erin's role as the manipulator behind the scenes remains the most chilling aspect of the case. She didn't swing the sword or pull the trigger, but she lit the fuse and then watched her world burn. To this day, her surviving father, Terry, has spoken publicly about forgiveness. But the scars run deep. Erin's name has become synonymous with betrayal, making her one of the youngest and most shocking female offenders in Texas criminal history. Love didn't blind her. It destroyed everything in its path. 9. Melissa Lucio. In 2007, paramedics in Harlingen, Texas, were called to a chaotic scene. A small, unresponsive child, named Mariah, lay on the floor of a crowded apartment. Just 2 years old, her tiny body was bruised and limp. She was pronounced dead shortly after. And within hours, Melissa Lucio, her mother, became the prime suspect in what would become one of the most debated death penalty cases in America. Melissa, a mother of 14 children, was immediately interrogated by police for over 5 hours. Exhausted, grieving, and overwhelmed, she eventually admitted to spanking and biting her daughter. But she never confessed to killing her. Still, prosecutors argued her statements were enough and presented them as a confession to murder. They painted her as a cold, abusive mother whose child had suffered repeated trauma. But Melissa's defenders, including medical experts and legal advocates, saw something different: a vulnerable woman trapped in a coercive system. They argued that Mariah had fallen down a flight of stairs days before her death and that Lucio was grieving, not guilty. At trial, Melissa's defense team failed to present crucial expert testimony on false confessions and trauma. There were no eyewitnesses, no surveillance footage, and no direct evidence tying her to an act of violence. But the jury convicted her of capital murder, and she was sentenced to death in 2008. Over the years, her case has drawn national attention. Documentaries, human rights groups, and even celebrities like Kim Kardashian and John Oliver have spoken out in her defense, calling it one of the clearest examples of a wrongful conviction on death row. In 2022, just days before her scheduled execution, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals granted a stay. In 2024, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles recommended overturning her conviction, citing concerns about withheld evidence and a lack of fair trial protections. Her fate now rests with the courts. Melissa Lucio remains behind bars, not because new evidence has proven her guilt, but because a system designed for justice may have failed her. Her case raises haunting questions. Can grief look like guilt? Can trauma silence the innocent? And how many others might sit on death row, sentenced not by facts, but by fear and assumption? Behind the walls of Texas prisons are women whose lives took irreversible turns, some driven by obsession, others by vengeance, trauma, or delusion. Their stories are not just about crime. They're about collapse, of relationships, of identity, of humanity. Some acted in cold blood, others claim they never acted at all, but they all share one thing: they are never walking free again. From Yolanda Saldívar, whose bullet ended a cultural era, to Melissa Lucio, whose guilt is still being debated in courtrooms and across dinner tables. The spectrum of these stories is wide. Some inmates are viewed as monsters, others as martyrs, and in between lies the complicated truth of a justice system that doesn't always get it right, and a society that sometimes forgets that guilt isn't always black and white. Texas has one of the highest rates of female incarceration in the country, and in a state known for its toughness on crime, forgiveness is rare. Even when doubt lingers, even when redemption is begged for. Some of these women will never see their families again outside a prison visitation room. Some don't want to. Others still fight to prove their innocence, or at least be seen as something more than the worst thing they ever did or were accused of. Justice, in theory, is meant to be blind. But the stories you've heard today raise a deeper question. Is justice truly served when context is ignored? When trauma is overlooked? When the line between guilt and grief is blurred? These 9 women live with the weight of their crimes, or the accusations that define them. Their names may be etched into headlines, courtroom transcripts, or parole documents. But behind those names are stories we may never fully understand. In the end, some are guilty beyond doubt. Others are still waiting for the world to listen. But one thing is certain: inside the cells of Texas prisons, freedom is more than a legal term. It's a memory, a longing, a question that may never be answered. Which of these cases disturbed you the most, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us next time as we uncover more stories from behind the bars of America's toughest prisons.